She called CPS on me for letting my son play outside alone. I was accused of severe child neglect. But what happened next will shock you. You won't believe how her overprotection destroyed her own daughter. As a parent, there are moments that truly test your patience. When you feel like you've got everything under control, life has a way of throwing you a curveball, and suddenly your reality seems completely turned upside down. That's exactly how I felt one Tuesday afternoon when I got a knock on the door. At first, I thought it was just a delivery, maybe a package or a magazine subscription, but when I opened the door, I found a caseworker standing on my porch with a clipboard in hand. I immediately felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. This wasn't just any ordinary visitor. The caseworker introduced herself, her badge barely visible beneath the folds of her jacket, and without skipping a beat, she said, "I'm here in response to a report made about your son." My first thought was disbelief. What could someone possibly report about my son? He was a good kid, responsible, independent, and kind-hearted. As I looked her up and down, trying to process her words, I could tell she was uncomfortable, unsure of how to present the situation. The whole thing felt surreal. "Mom," the caseworker began, "someone filed a report alleging severe neglect regarding your child's safety. Specifically, it's been reported that your son was outside, unsupervised for an extended period of time." I blinked. What? I couldn't help but laugh, hoping she would tell me this was some sort of mistake. "Unsupervised? What are you talking about?" The caseworker adjusted her glasses, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's been documented that your son was seen riding his bike alone in your backyard." I was starting to understand where this was going. He was riding his bike in our own yard, with a 6-foot fence around it, cameras, and a locked gate. How is that neglect? I felt my voice rising with frustration. Before the caseworker could respond, I saw a figure moving towards the porch. It was my neighbor, Lena. I could tell she had been waiting for this moment, lurking just out of sight. And when she appeared, her face was flushed with a mix of triumph and concern. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, practically breathless, as if she had been holding this in for weeks. "I've been documenting this neglect for a long time, and it's getting worse." She stepped forward, showing the caseworker her phone, which was filled with pictures of my son riding his bike in our yard. I was still trying to process what was happening when Lena spoke again. "Look at this. This child is left outside for hours without supervision. It's unacceptable. Anything could happen to him." She showed the caseworker more pictures, each one seemingly more dramatic than the last. "Just yesterday, he was out there for 30 minutes. No one was around." 30 minutes, I asked, incredulous. "I was in the shower for 20 minutes, and he was in our locked backyard. There's no way anything could have happened to him." Lena wasn't convinced. She was practically shaking with anger now, her voice escalating. "Anything can happen in 30 minutes. A kidnapper could climb that fence, or a wild animal could get to him. He could fall off his bike, break his neck, and bleed out before anyone could find him." The caseworker raised an eyebrow, clearly not prepared for this level of hysteria. "Mom, that's quite specific," she said, almost as if trying to get a grip on the situation. But Lena wasn't done. She was on a roll now, and nothing would stop her. "I'm just trying to protect the children in this neighborhood. You can't just leave a kid alone like that. You're not doing him any favors. Look at him. He's vulnerable out there." The caseworker shifted uncomfortably, looking between me and Lena. "I understand your concern, but he was in his own yard with a locked gate and a high fence. There's nothing dangerous about that." Lena's eyes widened in disbelief. "You don't understand. This is neglect. You don't know what could happen. You don't know the risks. Kidnappers are everywhere. Pedophiles, predators, criminals, they're lurking around every corner." She turned to me, her voice tight with accusation. "How can you be so irresponsible?" I felt the heat rising in my chest. The overwhelming frustration that comes with trying to explain something so simple to someone who just doesn't get it. "Lena, this is our yard. I trust my son. He's playing in a safe, secure space. If you're that concerned, maybe you should start by worrying about your own daughter, who still can't cross the street by herself at 12 years old." The words came out before I could stop them, and the look on Lena's face was priceless. Her cheeks went bright red, and I could see her bristling with anger. "That's responsible parenting," she snapped, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I protect my daughter from the world. That's what real parents do." I couldn't believe it. Real parents. You don't even let your daughter make a sandwich by herself. You tie her shoes because you think she'll choke on the laces. I was getting more worked up now, my voice rising as I continued. "She can't even touch a battery without supervision. How is that responsible parenting?" Lena's face twisted in shock. "You don't know anything about real parenting," she shouted. "You're just letting him run wild, letting him learn things the hard way. That's not how you raise a child." I crossed my arms and shook my head, trying to keep my composure. "Your daughter is terrified of the world. She can't even talk to a cashier without having a panic attack. You've completely sheltered her from reality, and look at the result. You've raised a child who is terrified to even interact with people." Lena's face went pale, and I could tell I'd hit a nerve. For a moment, she was speechless, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find the right words. "You don't understand?" she finally managed to say, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm just trying to keep her safe." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Lena, keeping your child safe isn't about locking them away. It's about giving them the tools they need to navigate the world. You can't protect them from everything. You have to trust them to grow, to learn from their own experiences." The caseworker, who had been standing silently in the background, finally spoke up. "Mom, I think you should consider that your approach may be causing more harm than good. Overprotecting children can lead to severe anxiety and difficulties later in life. This child," she gestured to my son, still playing in the yard, "appears healthy, confident, and age-appropriate. Your parenting is normal." Lena's face turned bright red, her eyes welling up with tears. "But you don't understand," she cried. "I'm just trying to protect her. I'm doing what's best for her." The caseworker held up her hand, her voice firm but calm. "Ma'am, calling CPS because a child is playing in his own yard is a misuse of emergency services. If you continue to make false reports, there will be legal consequences." Lena stood there, sputtering in disbelief as the caseworker turned and walked away. The entire situation felt like a bad dream, like something you'd see in a soap opera. I couldn't believe that someone would go to such lengths to try to prove a point, especially when that point was based on fear and misinformation. After the caseworker left, the atmosphere in my home felt different. The weight of the situation hung in the air like an invisible fog, thick with the absurdity of it all. I stood at the door, watching her walk away, trying to process the fact that someone in the neighborhood had called CPS over such a trivial thing. I could still hear Lena's voice echoing in my head, accusing me of neglecting my son, of not being a responsible parent. It made my stomach churn with frustration. But even more than that, it made me feel angry. Angry that someone who didn't know me, didn't know my family, could judge our choices so harshly. I shut the door behind me, leaning against it as I exhaled a heavy sigh. I felt the need to speak to someone, to make sense of what had just happened. I picked up the phone and dialed my husband, hoping his calm and level-headed nature would provide the balance I needed. When he answered, his voice was warm and I could feel the comfort of familiarity. "Hey, what's up? Are you sitting down?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. "What happened?" "I got a visit from CPS today." There was a slight hitch in his breathing before he replied. What? Why?" "It's a long story. But apparently, Lena called them because our son was outside for 20 minutes while I was in the shower." I paused, letting that sink in. "She's been documenting it, apparently, for weeks." There was a long silence before my husband spoke again. "That's insane." "I know," I replied, my voice tinged with disbelief. "She's making it sound like I'm some kind of criminal for letting him play outside in our own yard where he's safe." "Have you talked to her about it?" he asked. "I tried," I said, rubbing my temples. "But it's like talking to a wall. She doesn't get it. She thinks I'm being irresponsible for letting my son have some independence. Meanwhile, her daughter is terrified of even leaving the house." I shook my head in frustration. "It's like she's been living in a bubble her whole life." My husband's voice softened. "Well, you know your son is fine. You know what kind of parent you are, don't let her get to you." "I know," I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure. The visit from CPS had shaken me. I wasn't worried about losing my son, but I was worried about the message this would send. How far would Lena go to protect her own kids? And if she was willing to take this step, what other measures would she take? I stood there for a few more minutes, my thoughts swirling around. I just don't get it. Why does she think that keeping kids in a bubble will make them safer? How does she think it's gonna work in the long run? "I think," my husband said, carefully choosing his words, "she's afraid. Afraid of the world, and afraid of what could happen to her child if she lets her out of her sight for even a second. Maybe she's convinced herself that by controlling every single aspect of her daughter's life, she can keep her safe from the dangers she sees everywhere. But the truth is, she's only making it worse." I nodded, though I knew he couldn't see me. Exactly. "But I can't just let this go. If I do, it'll be like she's won. I have to prove that what I'm doing is normal, and that I'm not harming my child." "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "But just remember that this is her issue, not yours. You're doing the right thing by giving your son space to grow. That's how kids learn." "Thanks," I said softly, feeling a sense of relief settle in my chest. I just need to figure out what to do next. Lena had kept her distance, which I found strange. She didn't say a word when we ran into each other at the mailbox, didn't make eye contact. But I could feel her eyes on me whenever I stepped outside, and I knew that something was brewing beneath the surface. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. In fact, it felt like it was just the beginning. I had to admit that a small part of me was starting to worry. Lena was obsessed with control, and there was no telling how far she would go to push her version of good parenting onto others. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a one-off incident. This was a pattern of behavior that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. I had seen it in her attitude toward her daughter. How she kept her locked away from the world in an attempt to shield her from any possible harm. But this wasn't the world I wanted my child to grow up in. I wanted him to know that life had its dangers, sure, but also that he had the strength to handle them. I wanted him to experience the world with confidence, to know that he could make mistakes and learn from them. That's what growing up was all about. I couldn't help but wonder how Lena's daughter was doing, whether she had ever been given that same opportunity. The thought gnawed at me, especially after what had happened with the panic attack at McDonald's. A few days later, I got the opportunity to speak with Tom, Lena's husband. He knocked on my door in the evening, looking haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. The exhaustion in his eyes was clear. "Hey, do you have a minute?" he asked, his voice low. I stepped aside to let him in. "Of course. What's going on?" He sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing his face in frustration. "It's about Lena and our daughter." He paused before continuing, his voice filled with regret. "We thought we were doing the right thing, keeping her safe from the world. But now she's terrified of everything." "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting beside him. He sighed, looking defeated. "You saw it, right? What happened at McDonald's? She couldn't even order her food. She had a panic attack, convinced that the cashier was going to hurt her. She ran to the bathroom, crying. The manager had to call me because she was hyperventilating in the stall. I nodded slowly, understanding now. That's the result of what Lena's been doing to her. Keeping her locked away, thinking that if she controls everything, she can protect her. But it's doing the opposite. She's living in constant fear. Tom looked at me with an expression of helplessness. I didn't realize it until now, but Lena's way of protecting her is only making things worse. Our daughter can't function like a normal person. She's scared of everything, afraid to leave the house, afraid of even talking to a stranger. I could hear the despair in his voice. And now, we're stuck. We've spent 12 years teaching her to be afraid of the world. How do you undo that? How do you teach a 12-year-old to function in the world when she's been told, for her whole life, that it's too dangerous? I sat back, thinking for a moment. It's not going to be easy, I said finally. But it's possible. You have to start small. You have to expose her to the world gradually, in ways that feel safe to her. You can't just expect her to change overnight, but you can begin to help her unlearn that fear. Tom nodded, though I could see the weight of the challenge ahead of him. I'll try. I don't know if it'll work, but I'll try. The days following my conversation with Tom were filled with a strange mix of relief and concern. I was relieved to know that Tom was starting to see the cracks in Lena's overprotective approach. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a lingering worry. How much damage had been done to their daughter, and what would it take to help her? That night, I found myself thinking about the conversation we'd had. The way he spoke about their daughter's fear, her inability to function in the world outside her sheltered life. I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness for her. No child should live in fear, no matter how well-intentioned the parent might be. But at the same time, I understood the compulsion to protect, to shield your child from harm. It's what every parent wants, right? To protect their children from the dangers of the world. But somewhere along the way, Lena had taken that desire too far, suffocating her daughter with a layer of fear that prevented her from growing, from becoming a confident individual. I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that felt guilty for judging Lena's parenting so harshly. But how could I not, after everything that had happened? I felt like a failure as a parent sometimes, wondering if I had made the right choices for my son. It was difficult to avoid comparing my parenting style to Lena's, especially when it seemed like every move I made was under a microscope. That evening, after Tom left, I went outside to check on my son. He was sitting in the yard, casually tossing a ball back and forth with our dog. The same carefree expression he had on his face whenever he was out there. I couldn't help but smile at how happy he looked, how confident and unburdened by the world. "Hey buddy," I called out as I approached. He looked up, his face lighting up with a grin. "Hey mom, wanna play?" I chuckled, sitting down beside him. "I wish I could, but I need to talk to you for a second." He cocked his head to the side, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What's up?" I hesitated, unsure of how to bring it up. "So, you remember Lena, right? Your friend from next door?" He nodded slowly, his expression turning serious. "Yeah, what about her?" "Well," I began. "She called CPS on me the other day." He blinked, not quite understanding. "CPS? Why?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Because you were playing in the backyard alone for a little while. She thought I was being irresponsible." My son let out a laugh, the kind that only kids can pull off. Genuine, unbothered. "That's silly. I was just riding my bike." "I know," I said, my voice softening. "But it made me realize something. I never want you to feel like you have to hide what you enjoy. I want you to have freedom, but I also want you to be safe. You know the difference, right?" "Yeah. I know," he said confidently. "You trust me, I can take care of myself?" "You absolutely can," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "And I want you to always know that." The conversation ended there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking a fine line. Was I too lenient with my son? Was I letting him grow too independent too fast? I was constantly second-guessing myself, but I knew deep down that giving him that freedom, that confidence, was what would help him become the person I wanted him to be. Resilient, capable, and unafraid of the world. A few weeks passed. Lena's silence had become almost unbearable. She stopped making eye contact with me whenever we crossed paths, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air like a thick cloud. Every time I saw her, I wanted to say something, to confront her, to ask her why she couldn't just trust me to raise my own child. But I never did. There was no point. It would only escalate things further. And yet, every time I saw her, I couldn't help but feel the weight of her disapproval. Then, one evening after dinner, I received an unexpected call. It was from Tom. "Hey, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice a little strained. "Is it okay if I come over?" "Of course," I replied. "Come by any time." A few minutes later, Tom knocked on the door. His face was drawn, tired. He had the look of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. I ushered him in, and he immediately sat down at the kitchen table, running a hand through his hair. "I need to apologize," he said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. "For everything." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "For the way Lynn has been acting," he said, looking down at his hands. "For the way we've been treating you and your family. I see it now. I see how wrong it is." I was stunned into silence for a moment, unsure how to respond. "I don't understand," I finally said. "What do you mean? You've always been supportive." Tom's eyes met mine. "I should have said something sooner. I should have stood up for you. I should have realized that Lena's, I don't even know how to say this, but she's been suffocating our daughter with fear, and it's affecting everything. I never saw it before, but now it's clear. It's too late for us to go back and fix things, but I want to apologize for not seeing it sooner." I took a deep breath, my heart heavy. "Tom, you don't have to apologize. It's not your fault. Yes, it is, he replied, his voice cracking. I've been enabling Lena's behavior. I've let it go on for too long. But what's worse, I've let it affect my daughter. She's terrified of everything. She can't even talk to people without panicking. It's my fault for not stepping in. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to reach out and reassure him, but I also felt that he needed to face this on his own. There was no quick fix, no easy solution. This was something that had built up over years, something that would take time to undo. But I could tell he was ready, and that was the first step. We can help her, I said, my voice steady. But it's gonna take time, it's gonna take patience and effort. She can learn to live without fear, but it will be a process. Tom nodded slowly, his expression filled with both hope and fear. I'm willing to try. The weeks that followed were difficult for both families. Tom began slowly introducing his daughter to small, controlled interactions with the world outside the house. First with trips to the grocery store, then with brief walks to the park. Each time, he was there, encouraging her to take small steps. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were moments of panic, tears, and frustration. But there were also moments of progress. Tiny victories like when she managed to order her own meal at a restaurant or talk to a stranger without breaking down. For Lena, the process was slower. She resisted, clinging to her fears and her need for control. But Tom's steady encouragement began to chip away at her walls. Slowly, she began to realize that the world wasn't as dangerous as she had made it out to be. And slowly, she began to change her behavior. The transformation in Lena and Tom's family didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, gradual process. But over the next few months, I watched as Tom's persistence and a small shift in Lena's outlook slowly began to make a difference. One afternoon, I was outside tending to the garden when I saw Tom walking down the street with his daughter. She was holding his hand, her steps uncertain but steady. I watched them for a few moments, noticing how she kept glancing around. But this time, there was something different about her. There was less fear in her eyes, more curiosity. Tom saw me watching from the garden and waved, a hesitant but genuine smile crossing his face. I waved back, and he crossed the street to join me. Hey, I said, brushing dirt from my hands. How's she doing? She's doing better, he replied, his voice filled with a mix of pride and relief. We went to the park today. She didn't panic when a stranger asked her for directions. It's a small step, but it's something. I smiled, feeling a sense of hope that had been missing for so long. That's great. I'm proud of you guys. Tom glanced over at his daughter, who was standing a few paces away, staring at a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. I think we're getting there, he said softly. It's not easy, but we're trying. As he spoke, I noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. There was a sense of strength in him now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just trying to fix his daughter, he was also trying to fix himself, to break free from the patterns of fear and control that had held their family hostage for so long. That's all you can do, I said, my voice warm. Keep taking it one day at a time. Tom nodded, his eyes lingering on his daughter, who was now crouched down, watching the butterfly flutter away. I just wish Lena could see it the way I do. I think she's still too wrapped up in her own fears. She doesn't realize how much she's been holding them both back. I think she's starting to see it, I said carefully, choosing my words. She's just not ready to admit it yet. Tom was silent for a moment, and I could tell he was processing my words. Finally, he sighed. Yeah, I think you're right. I just wish it wasn't taking so long. But maybe that's part of the healing too, right? We all have our own journey. I nodded in agreement. Me do. And the most important thing is that you're there for her. You're showing her that the world doesn't have to be a scary place, one step at a time. He smiled, his eyes glinting with a new sense of hope. Thanks, I needed to hear that. A few weeks later, Lena and I finally had a conversation. It had been a while since we'd really talked. Just the two of us. The tension between us had been palpable, and though I knew she still felt a sense of ownership over her daughter's future, I also knew she was beginning to see the cracks in her own way of thinking. It happened one afternoon when I ran into her at the mailbox. I wasn't expecting much, but when she looked at me, there was something different in her eyes. Maybe it was the way her shoulders were slightly slumped or the softening of her expression. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was looking at an adversary. I was looking at someone who was struggling with her own fears, her own doubts. Hey, she said, her voice hesitant. Can we talk for a second? I was taken aback. I had expected a confrontation, but this was different. Of course. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the ground before looking back up at me. And I know I've been difficult, and I know I've pushed you away. I guess I was just so focused on trying to keep my daughter safe that I didn't see what I was doing to her, or to anyone else. I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. Lena, it's not easy. I get that. We all want to protect our kids, but sometimes we forget that they need to learn how to protect themselves too. She nodded slowly. I didn't realize that. I thought that if I kept her in this bubble, she'd be safe. But now I see what it's doing to her. She's afraid of everything, and I'm afraid that I've ruined her. I don't know how to undo all the damage I've done. You haven't ruined her, I said softly. It's going to take time, but she's strong. She can recover from this. Lena looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and hope. I hope so. I really do. Lena, I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's never too late to change. The fact that you're recognizing it now, that's the first step, and your daughter will follow your lead. She looked away for a moment, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm so sorry for what I did to you, for calling CPS, for everything. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It's okay. I know you were just trying to do what you thought was best. I get it now. But you don't have to go through this alone. We're all learning together. Lena met my gaze, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Thanks. I think I've been too proud to ask for help before. But maybe it's time to stop doing everything on my own. I smiled back at her. We're all in this together, and we're all learning, one step at a time. The final steps in their journey weren't easy, but they were worth it. Over the next few months, I watched as Lena began to shift her perspective on parenting. She started allowing her daughter to experience more of the world, even if it was only in small doses. Lena didn't give up her desire to protect her, but she learned to trust her daughter more, to let her face challenges, and to help her grow stronger from them. Lena's daughter gradually started to open up. She began speaking more at school, interacting with other kids, and showing a level of independence that had been stifled for years. It wasn't perfect, and there were setbacks. But with Tom's support and Lena's gradual shift in mindset, their daughter started to rebuild the confidence that had been stripped away by years of overprotection. And for me, watching it all unfold was bittersweet. I had been the one to witness the effects of Lena's overprotective nature from the outside, but now I was seeing the family begin to heal. It was a painful journey, but it was also one of growth, of self-awareness, and of taking responsibility for their actions. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Lena came over to visit. She had been over a few times since our last conversation, but today felt different. She seemed more at ease, more confident in her decisions. She had made progress and I could see it. I wanted to thank you, Lena said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, for being patient with me, for not giving up on me. I know I've been difficult, but I've learned a lot. I smiled, sipping my coffee. We all have, Lena. You're not alone in this. She nodded, her voice soft but steady. I'm just glad I didn't lose everything trying to hold on too tight. No one's perfect, I said, but you're doing great. It's never too late to start. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. Thanks. I think we're finally getting the hang of this parenting thing. Yeah, I replied, laughing. One step at a time. It had been a year since the CPS incident, and both families had come a long way. Tom and Lena's daughter was thriving, no longer the timid, fearful child she once was. Lena had learned to loosen the reins, allowing her daughter the freedom she needed to grow, while still offering her the love and support she deserved. As for my son, he was more independent than ever. His self-confidence had soared, and I had learned to trust him more than I ever had before. And with that trust came a deeper bond, one based not on control, but on mutual respect. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. We had all learned something crucial about the balance between protection and independence, about the dangers of overprotection, and the importance of allowing our children to grow. And so, as the years went on, we all found our way, together yet apart, learning that sometimes letting go is the hardest but most important thing we can do.